We've crossed a dangerous line when actual war becomes more acceptable than political discomfort. That moment when cheering for bombs, bloodshed, and foreign entanglements feels more palatable to some than tolerating someone they politically disagree with. Something has gone fundamentally wrong. This isn't journalism anymore, it's theater. A dangerous theater with real-world consequences, where the media seems more invested in revenge narratives than real solutions. It's no longer about keeping the public informed. It's about feeding them emotionally charged stories to keep them engaged, even if that means flirting with chaos. You have to stop and ask, how did we get here? When did basic human decency take a backseat to scoring ideological points? There's a real sickness in the idea that suffering abroad is somehow justified because it might make a political opponent look bad. People in other countries become pawns, their lives, their homes, their safety reduced to leverage in a culture war broadcast from air-conditioned studios. This isn't just irresponsible, it's dangerous. It's propaganda parading as news, and many are swallowing it whole because it confirms what they want to believe. War is not a movie. It's not a segment with dramatic music and flashing graphics. It's death. It's children without homes, soldiers who don't come back, and entire communities turned to rubble. If you're rooting for that, even indirectly, because you're angry at someone in power, then maybe it's time to look in the mirror. When did being on the right side mean abandoning our most basic instincts for compassion? When did cruelty become acceptable so long as it's cloaked in political righteousness? The real tragedy is that this kind of media manipulation works. It's crafted to bypass logic and go straight to emotion. Outrage is easier to sell than reason. Fear grabs more attention than context, and the ones pulling the strings know it. They know how to stoke the flames just enough to keep you angry, but never enough to give you clarity. They don't want you thinking, they want you reacting, because a viewer who's reacting is a viewer who keeps watching. And as long as the cameras are rolling, truth doesn't have to be part of the equation. If you think questioning this makes you disloyal or unpatriotic, think again. True loyalty means standing up for truth, even when it's uncomfortable. It means calling out your own side when they go too far. It means recognizing when you're being manipulated and refusing to play along. That's not weakness, that's strength, that's integrity, and it's exactly what's missing in too many newsrooms today. Instead, we get echo chambers disguised as coverage, outrage disguised as insight. Somewhere along the way, the media stopped asking what's really happening and started asking, how do we make this person look bad? That shift has consequences. When war becomes a political football, it ceases to be a global emergency and starts becoming a tool. And that kind of thinking leads nations into disaster. We cannot let opinion replace fact. We cannot allow our empathy to be so conditional that we only care about suffering when it fits a narrative. In the end, this isn't about who's right or wrong politically. It's about remembering that war is real, that the people who suffer don't care about your side or your ideology. They care about staying alive. And if any part of you is hoping things get worse somewhere in the world just to prove a point back home, you've been sold a lie. It's time to demand better, not just from the media, but from ourselves. Because if we don't, the real cost won't just be truth. It'll be human life. Somewhere along the way, we started valuing the appearance of being right over the actual act of doing what is right. This shift wasn't sudden, it crept in quietly, through our conversations, our media, and our institutions. We began to prioritize winning debates over understanding truth, and shouting louder became more important than listening deeply. In this environment, principles gave way to pride, and morality was slowly replaced by ideological tribalism. What mattered most was proving the other side wrong, not improving the lives of the people affected by our decisions. The hunger to be seen as correct has overshadowed the need to be compassionate, wise, or just. People are more invested in preserving their image and world view than engaging with the nuance and complexity of real life consequences. It's no longer about helping others. It's about scoring points and delivering clever put-downs. This attitude is toxic because it takes the focus off what's truly at stake: human lives, families, and futures, and centers everything around ego and image. That obsession with being right at all costs opens the door to dangerous thinking. It becomes easier to justify harmful actions as long as they make the enemy look bad. We start believing that suffering is acceptable if it reinforces our narrative. And when that suffering involves war, death, and destruction, the moral cost becomes unbearable. But if we're too busy celebrating a political win to see the damage, we've already lost more than we know. Hatred for a single person or group becomes a convenient excuse to cheer for outcomes that no one should ever welcome. If we find ourselves wishing for economic collapse, international crisis, or even war just because it might embarrass a political figure we dislike, then something is seriously wrong. That level of bitterness doesn't just cloud judgment, it poisons it. It warps our ability to care for others and turns us into participants in destruction, rather than defenders of peace and reason. When being right becomes more important than being decent, we lose our moral compass entirely. Right and wrong are no longer based on ethics or humanity, but on which side wins the argument. That's a dangerous place to be, because it leads us to justify nearly anything if it advances our preferred narrative. It desensitizes us to suffering and emboldens us to use real-world crises as leverage in our personal or political battles. The worst part is, many people don't even realize they're doing it. They've been fed a steady diet of outrage, fear, and division for so long that it feels normal. They think their anger is righteous and their spite is justified, but that mindset doesn't heal anything. It only deepens the divide. It replaces empathy with cynicism and thoughtful engagement with knee-jerk hostility. And over time it chips away at the very fabric of our shared humanity. We need to recenter ourselves around what's actually right, not just what makes us look or feel right. That means taking a hard look at our motives, questioning our emotional reactions, and caring about outcomes more than optics. It's not about agreeing with everyone or giving up your beliefs. It's about remembering that people matter more than points, and peace is more valuable than pride. If we can't find our way back to that, then being right won't mean much in the end. People aren't blind. The public knows when they're being emotionally manipulated. And while many are finally starting to question what they're being fed, the bigger question is, will they act before the damage is permanent? People aren't blind. They may not have the microphone or the airtime, but they have instinct. Most people can feel when something isn't right, even if they can't always articulate it. When they're constantly being fed stories that provoke anger, fear, or guilt, many start to realize that they're being emotionally pulled in a direction that serves someone else's agenda. It's not just news anymore, it's influence disguised as information, and over time, even the average viewer begins to sense that manipulation is happening behind the scenes. But the truth is, recognizing manipulation and doing something about it are two very different things. It's easy to feel that something is off. It's much harder to step out of the echo chamber and challenge the narratives that have been shaped around your beliefs. Once the manipulation becomes part of your identity, once you've aligned yourself emotionally with what you're being fed, breaking free takes courage. It's not just about information anymore. It's about facing the possibility that you've been played, and few people enjoy admitting that. There's also the illusion of being informed. With endless news cycles and flashy graphics, people feel like they're plugged into the truth. But what they're often getting is a curated version of reality, tilted to fit a certain framework. The emotional charge in the stories isn't accidental, it's deliberate. It's meant to trigger a reaction, to keep people locked in, not to inspire thought, but to provoke outrage. And once people realize this, the trust that held the system together begins to break. Still, for many, outrage is easier than action. It feels good to be angry, especially when you believe you're on the right side of history, but staying angry without thinking critically leads to paralysis. It becomes a cycle: watch, react, feel righteous, repeat. And while people get louder, the outcomes stay the same or worse. The damage being done in the background, real societal, economic, and global harm, continues unchecked because attention is being funneled into outrage instead of change. That's the real danger. The longer people delay action, the more permanent the damage becomes. Systems that exploit division get stronger. Voices that call for reason get drowned out. The emotional manipulation becomes normalized, expected, even celebrated. And once that happens, undoing the effects takes more than awareness. It requires a movement of people willing to step away from their comfort, away from their digital tribes, and demand truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The question remains, will people rise to that challenge? Will they unplug from the noise long enough to reflect, to question, to hold accountable the voices they once trusted? Because if they don't, the manipulation continues to shape thought, opinion, and even policy. It infiltrates every level of society until people no longer recognize their own beliefs as separate from the stories they've consumed. By then, real thinking is lost, and what remains is reaction, repetition, and regret. We are not without hope, but time is not on our side. If people want to reclaim their minds, their values, and their future, they must act while there's still something to reclaim. This means questioning what you're told, tracing the source of your emotional reactions, and demanding better from every platform that claims to inform you. Because once you see the manipulation clearly, the only choice left is whether to stay comfortable in it or to finally break free. Some media outlets have developed a dependency on outrage. It's not just a strategy anymore, it's the core of their business model. The louder and more divisive the headline, the more clicks and views it generates. It's not about thoughtful dialogue or nuanced reporting. It's about stirring emotions quickly and repeatedly. Anger gets attention, fear holds it, and outrage keeps the cycle going. This formula has become a well-oiled machine that doesn't just report the news, it manufactures a reaction. Division isn't just a byproduct of modern media, it's a deliberate tactic. When people are divided, they engage more often. They argue in the comments, they share posts out of frustration, and they tune in hoping to feel vindicated. Outlets have learned that keeping people emotionally triggered ensures loyalty, not to truth, but to the platform or personality delivering the message. It's not about resolution. It's about keeping the conflict alive just long enough to roll another advertisement or boost another subscription. The sad truth is that unity doesn't sell. Peaceful cooperation doesn't drive ratings, conflict does. So the stories that get repeated, emphasized, and dramatized are the ones that highlight difference, amplify disagreement, and paint the other side as a threat. This creates a warped view of reality where everything feels like a crisis and everyone is an enemy. It's no wonder people feel more anxious, more hopeless, and more angry than ever before. War, especially, becomes an irresistible product in this environment. The threat of conflict, the spectacle of battle, and the imagery of destruction create a gripping narrative that holds viewers captive. It becomes content. Real suffering, real danger, and real consequences are reduced to footage and sound bites. People forget that behind every headline is a human story. But when ratings spike during international turmoil, some networks treat it like a windfall instead of a warning. This distortion of purpose corrupts the foundation of journalism. The media was once seen as a watchdog, a check on power, a servant of the public. But when profit replaces principle, the mission changes. The goal is no longer to inform, but to inflame. This shift has enormous consequences because the stories we consume shape how we see the world, how we treat each other, and how we respond to crisis. And when those stories are designed to divide, the damage ripples far beyond the screen. What's most troubling is how deeply people internalize this constant outrage. It doesn't just affect how they see the news, it affects how they live their lives. Families split over politics, communities grow hostile, and empathy declines. All because someone, somewhere, decided that unity was less valuable than attention. When division is packaged as entertainment, it begins to erode the very relationships and values that hold society together. The answer isn't to avoid the news or to pretend the world isn't complicated. It's to demand better. Demand reporting that informs rather than inflames, that explains rather than exploits. We need to be aware of how easily we're pulled into outrage and how often that outrage serves someone else's interest, not ours. Until we change the way we consume media, the cycle will continue, and the voices profiting from our division will only grow louder.